So today we're going to be looking at a brand that I feel like doesn't get much love in the watch community. Not even really many people review any watches from the brand, even though they are still owned by Swatch Group. And that is Certina. We have a pretty cool, one of their like kind of entry-level models, and let's get into it. First, let's go over a little bit of the history of the brand. Pretty much they were founded in about the late 1880s by two brothers, and they just had like a small workshop in their house. They worked on watches. Back then it might have been clocks. Don't know 100%. But, you know, over the years they grew a little bit, added more employees. By the 1920s, you know, we're going through the Great Depression, or at least coming out of it. And then the two brothers of one of the original brothers took over the company. They started using the brand name Certina, and starting into the 40s, 50s, 60s, they started actually taking off as a brand. At first, they didn't use Certina in the late 1900s, but Certina was the actual name that they went going forward. It is Latin for sure. Not sure why they went with that name, but they did. And they actually had some pretty cool stuff they came out with. In 1959, they came out with their first kind of like dive watch, the DS Action Diver. And, you know, that's like kind of like back in the days where everyone was getting in the whole dive watch craze. The Submariner was released in, I believe, 1953. The Seamaster came in 1957. So the Certina was really actually right on the heels of the whole movement. Going into the 1970s, I believe, they had this cool model called the BioStar, and it was kind of like the world's first smartwatch in a way. It tracked biorhythms, and it was really interesting because basically when you bought the watch, the date of your actual birth had to be calculated into the mechanism, and from there they used a cyclic pattern, which is what the whole biorhythm idea was based off of. Like, it was a pattern of like 23 days, 28 days, and 33 days, I believe, for like just regular like physical, mental, and something else having to do with health. And, you know, it would go through these rise and falls, and you can look at your wrist and be like, well, I'm not in a good mental place right now, I guess. So that was kind of an interesting watch that they came out with. And going into the 80s, I believe they started becoming part of what would become later the Swatch Group. And, you know, they just had, you know, certain like partnerships and some dive watch heritage with some like military groupings and whatnot, and some like studies going on under the sea where, you know, their watches were used. But what I found most interesting is in 2017 they started pretty much like widely using I think what they call the Pressy Drive quartz movement, which I didn't even know existed in their line, but apparently it's a quartz movement that's literally accurate to plus minus 10 seconds a year, which is literally on the level of like Grand Seiko quartz accuracy. Apparently some of their models are actually like chronometer rated for quartz, and I think that's actually pretty cool. So yeah, that's a little history, a little spiel on the brand, and let's get into the watch. You have a diameter of about 40 millimeters, a lug-to-lug distance of about 48, and a thickness of about 12.7. We get the lug width of about 21 millimeters. Now, overall, pretty good dimensions. The 21 millimeter lug width is a little bit of a bummer, but, you know, can't win all the battles. In the watch, we have beating an ETA 2852, which is basically just a small second version of the 2824. So, you know, the normal kind of stats always apply. You got the 28,800 vibrations per hour. You got about a 42 hour power reserve, and, you know, reliable, great ETA movement, easy to service, availability of parts. With this model, they didn't decorate it pretty much at all. Custom rotor though, so that's kind of nice. We have 100 meters of water resistance, but no screw down crown. Sapphire crystal, I believe, on the front and the back. So getting into the watch more closely, as you can see, that dial is pretty crazy. It has this nice kind of wavy pattern all throughout the dial, and it's even hard for my camera to pick up sometimes because it like shifts, because there's ridges and valleys. It's like it sinks in almost like a U shape between each little layer there, so it really plays with the light, looks really good, and I feel that this watch retailing at about $300, well, not necessarily retailing, but being able to find them for between like the $300 and $400 range, even $200 to $300 used. This is a pretty good buy because this dial is pretty cool. The movement's good. I think the watch is just really unique in what it is for the price. You see, we kind of have the typical sword hands, regular square indices, a nice minute and seconds track on the outer ring. Again, the beautiful dial, small second register there with the nice date window at 6, which I like because it keeps more into the symmetry of the watch. Certina, 1888 when they were founded. So, you know, a brand with a little bit of heritage. But overall, I think a really well done dial. As we'll see later, if I can kind of pick it up here, you see each one of those markers are actually sloped down slightly. So they start at one level and they slope down very gently. And I think that just adds a little dynamics to the dial, and it's just a cool touch they didn't have to add, especially at this price, but I'm happy they did. So getting a look at this dial a lot closer, we just see how nice and fine and really just deep those ridges are. And as you can see, there's definitely a kind of river and valley kind of thing happening. Every single line there is, so here we are a lot closer with the dial, and you can just tell there's a lot happening. The ridges are very well defined. You can see the very wavy pattern, not only just in the pattern itself, but in how it goes from high to low texture wise. There's a river valley thing happening there that's just really, really cool, and I think it just adds something very different to the dial, especially when you see it at angles like this. You see it from the wrist, you're playing it within the light, it definitely transitions and just looks really, really cool. I've never seen a dial done like this, and I really enjoy it. It looks really done. It's really well finished for really the sub $500 price point. As you can see going around, there's not really any imperfections in that dial. If we get closer on those markers, we can see again, not only do they play with the light very well, having their two polished sections there, but as I mentioned earlier, we can see that it actually slopes downwards. Beautiful applied markers with Lume inside them, printed hour and minute track, or well, minute and even further reduced to minute track. But I think it's really nice. I'm surprised how well that Certina logo is coming through, especially just looking at the watch, because it's printed on that wavy pattern, and I think you have to do that printing well for it to come across as looking good. And I think you have to do that printing well for it to come across as looking good from the wrist, from these kind of macro angle. Overall, just really nicely done. And I do appreciate how they did a different kind of texturing for this sub-dial here. I have a nice matte texturing, a little kind of silvery eggshell thing kind of going on. Very nice. All the printing very well done. No misprints. Nice crisp date cutout. Beautiful patterning. Maybe a little speck there as far as misprints go or imperfections, but really gorgeous, gorgeous dial. Gorgeous, gorgeous dial. So we're going to take a look at the Lume. On the right we have my Pelagos, in the middle we have my Certina, and on the very left we have the classic Timex Snoopy. So as you can see, the Lume isn't anything super special. You can tell the Pelagos is shining much brighter, but overall I think the Lume is done pretty decently on it. It is keeping pretty well. You can tell there is more Lume applied on the hands and the 3, 6, 9, and 12 markers than the rest of the watch. If I bring my Snoopy in for comparison, again we see the Snoopy is much brighter. Yeah, it's definitely not the worst Lume. It does have a nice bluish type of hue to it that is not really coming across in this video, but overall, not the worst, and definitely better than having no Lume at all. So moving on more to the case of this watch, there's not much to talk about because every single surface is polished. There's no brushing, there's no chamfering, there's no, interesting So moving on to the case of this watch, it's pretty much all polished. You can see right here with the lugs, if it'll focus, that we have that type of, you can see right here with the lugs that we have that type of, you can see right here with the lugs, if you get a little closer look, that we have that type of downward brush. As you can see here with the lugs, we have that type of downward brushing over the tops. Not super defined, but of course not the worst finishing I've ever seen. Still shows that they had intent to, add some interest to the watch. But overall, I think the case is pretty much plain. Again, the dial is really the star of the show. We have polished sloping bezel, polished sides. Again, the flat sapphire crystal. Polished case back with the see-through case back. You got the nice DS Action logo. You got the nice DS Action logo there on the crown. But overall, I don't think this is a case that's trying to stand out too much. I think the most drawing part of it is really that slightly domed kind of bulbous bezel that it has, just because it slopes with the case so well and is really so well integrated. I think it does draw attention as it is on the wrist, and just definitely adds to the look of the watch. So to see how this watch wears, earlier I was wearing my Tudor Pelagos. So here we have the watch on top of my 6.5 inch wrist, and I think it does really wear well. The 48mm lug-to-lug distance definitely helps it sit within a smaller wrist well. My max wristband is maybe about 52mm, so I can wear a fairly large amount of watches, but I think as long as you're comfortable with a slightly bigger watch, I mean, it's not even that large at 40mm, but overall, I think it does carry its size well. You have certain things like the sub-seconds that cut into the dial and allow it to seem maybe a little smaller than its dimensions would say. But overall, there is a slight, if I can get it, there's a slight curvature. There is a slight curvature to the case that allows it to wear pretty slim to the wrist, so that's nice. The watch isn't overly thick, and from the wrist it doesn't seem too thick either, so that's a nice thing. This definitely is more of a casual leaning dress watch versus a complete dress watch, especially with that playful dial. But yeah, overall I think it wears very well on the wrist. I enjoy it. Just to note, it does come on a bracelet. I just bought a version that didn't come with the bracelet, so got this Barton silicone to match with it. I think silicone does a really good job, especially if it's a nicer silicone, on dressing down a dress watch, as well as Barton specifically, because this watch has 21mm lugs, and Barton now supplies 21mm straps in multiple of their lines, so you're not as lost out in the dark if you want to find something to switch up this watch or any other your odd size lug widths from here on out. So my pros and cons for this watch, basically. I think one of the main pros and really just one of the main standouts of the watch is the amazing dial. It has a great texture. It's very deep texture, detailed, and well executed. So I think that's something that definitely stands out for the watch, and especially at the price point of around $300 you can find them at. It also has a pretty good movement. It has an ETA in it, It's not some, proprietary or Swatch Group Powermatic movement. It is a tried and true ETA that can be serviced, replaced, parts found for. So that's pretty cool as well. And the kind of like last thing I just appreciate about the watch, I respect about it, is it's its own thing. It's not trying to be like a Viso Date or a Bambino or a Sarb or a Seiko SKX for that matter. Just like all these kind of like popular watches you find in this price range. It is unequivocally its own watch. It is the Certina. It has its own cool wave texture. It has its own sizing in a way, which we'll get to. And yeah, I think it's a well executed watch. And it's interesting for the price and what they offer. Now going into cons, it has a weird sizing. I would say it's fairly thick. The lug to lug could be a little bit shorter, and it could be a little bit smaller. Of course, I mean I think it's 40 millimeters. Might be like 13 millimeters high if I'm getting that correctly, and 21 millimeter lugs. The 21 millimeter lugs are a pain. I mean, they could have just made 20. They could have done 22 for that matter. But I mean, Barton makes some 21 millimeter straps now, so you're not completely limited on options, but it's still an annoyance. But no, I mean, the sizing, they could have made it smaller in pretty much every dimension, but I think even if you've seen it on my wrist, it doesn't wear horribly. It's just that I think it could wear potentially better. Another semi-con, semi-pro is the date. I know a lot of people love a date. Some people are purists and they don't want a date. But for me personally, it's just that I like that they put it at 6. It's a good place to put it. It keeps the symmetry of the dial. But personally, I feel like the date in this situation takes away from the beauty of the dial, the texturing of the dial. It cuts into the sub-seconds register. So although I don't hate dates on watches, I feel like this is one of those watches where if you forego the date, I think it would have looked a little bit stronger in its design. But really, I don't have that many cons. It's a cool watch. It's definitely something that's different. It is, I think, definitely worth the money. It is annoying to have to find 20 millimeter straps. But if you're looking for a kind of watch that straddles that casual dress zone, I think this could be for you. It's from a brand not many people know, but I think that's kind of like a niche cool factor to it. And you still have like the power of Swatch Group behind it, so it's not like Certina is going to go out of business anytime soon. So I mean, if you've been looking at this watch, or I mean if you haven't until this video, I think it's an option you should consider, because ever since I saw that dial specifically, I was just like, this is a cool watch and I want to kind of just see how it is. So hope you enjoyed the review, and looking forward to seeing you in another one.